My friend and I used to live in a small hostel room that always smelled faintly of old books, detergent, and late-night tea. It was a special place. Just four plain walls, two narrow beds, and a window that looked out onto another building just as tired as ours. But for us, that room was everything. It held our routines, our secrets, our laughter, and the quiet moments we never talked about but somehow shared. We had been living together for almost a year. College life had brought us close in a way I hadn't expected. We studied together, complained about exams, argued over silly things like whose turret was clean, and stayed awake far too late talking about life. He trusted me, and I trusted him. In a hostel full of strangers, we had become each other's safe space. That morning felt no different from any other. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains, landing directly on my face and forcing my eyes open. My friend was already getting ready, rushing as usual. He had an early lecture and was running late. I watched him from my bed as he hurried around the room, pulling on his shirt, stuffing books into his bag, speaking half sentences as if continuing a conversation from a dream. "Don't forget to lock the door," he said casually, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "I won't," I replied. He smiled that familiar, easy smile and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I didn't know then that that sound would stay with me for a long time. The hostel grew quiet after he left. Most students were in class, and the corridors felt unusually empty. I sat on my bed, scrolling on my phone, then put aside and stared at the ceiling. There was a strange stillness in the room, the kind that makes you more aware of your own thoughts. I told myself it was just another ordinary day. A knock on the door broke the silence. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then there was another knock, firmer this time. I stood up, slightly annoyed, wondering who it could be. When I opened the door, I saw a man standing there, older, well-dressed, with a calm but serious expression. "Are you my son's roommate?" he asked. For a second, my mind went blank. Then I realized who he must be. "Yes," I said, stepping aside. "You're his father, right?" He nodded. "He told me you stay together." "He's not here. He went to college." I replied. There was a brief pause, the kind that feels longer than it really is. Then he smiled politely. "May I come in for a moment?" I hesitated, then moved aside. "Of course." He stepped into the room, looking around slowly, taking the beds, the desk, the scattered books. It felt strange seeing someone from the outside world in our private space. This room had always belonged only to us. "Please sit," I said, pulling out the chair. "Thank you," he replied, sitting down. I was in town and thought I'd surprise him. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. To fill the silence, I offered him tea. He accepted, and as I prepared it, I felt an odd nervousness I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a quiet awareness, as if something subtle had shifted. When I handed him the cup, our fingers brushed for just a moment. It was nothing, completely accidental, yet it sent a strange sensation through me. I quickly pulled my hand back and sat on the edge of my bed, telling myself I was overthinking. We talked. At first, it was simple, harmless conversation. He asked about college, about how his son was doing, whether he studied properly, whether he ate on time. I answered honestly, even joking a little. He listened carefully, his eyes never wandering, as if every word mattered. "You seem very close," he said at one point. "Yes," I replied without thinking. "We are." He smiled softly. "That's good. Trust is rare." Something about the way he said it made my chest feel tight. I wasn't sure why. I shifted slightly, suddenly aware of how quiet the room was, how close we were sitting. He asked about me then, where I was from, what I wanted to do in life, what kind of person I thought I was. No one had ever asked me those questions so directly before. I found myself answering honestly, more honestly than I usually did. Words came out of my mouth before I had time to stop them. As I spoke, I felt seen in a way that unsettled me. It wasn't romantic or physical. It was emotional, subtle, and that somehow made it more confusing. I noticed myself choosing my words carefully, wanting to understand me, to think well of me. That realization, made me uncomfortable. I told myself to calm down. This was just my friend's father. Nothing more. Still, there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension I couldn't name. I thought about my friend, about how easily he trusted both of us. A small knot formed in my stomach, though nothing wrong had happened. Not yet, when my friend didn't return for hours. The conversation stretched longer than I expected. Time passed differently in that room, slow and fast at the same time. Part of me wanted the door to open, to break whatever invisible thread was forming. Another part stayed silent. Eventually, he stood up. "I should go," he said. "I'll see him later." I nodded, standing as well. "Yes, of course." As he walked to the door, he turned back for a moment. "You're a good person," he said. "My son is lucky to have you." After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. The room felt different now, as if it had absorbed something it shouldn't have. I sat on my bed, staring at the floor, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to have. I didn't understand then that this was only the beginning, that one quiet day in a hostel room would change the way I saw trust, boundaries, and myself forever. After that day, nothing looked the same, even though everything appeared exactly as before. The same hostel room, the same beds, the same routine, but something inside me had shifted. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I had read too much into a simple visit. Still, my thoughts kept returning to that quiet afternoon, replaying small details I wished I could forget. When my friend came back that evening, he was tired and talkative, complaining about lectures and assignments. I listened, nodded, laughed at the right moments. From the outside, I'm sure I seemed normal. Inside, however, there was a strange pressure in my chest, like I was holding on to a secret I hadn't chosen. Dad called me. He said suddenly, "Throw his bag on the bed." He said he came by. My heart skipped. "Yes," I replied carefully. "He came to see you, but you weren't here." "Oh," he said casually. "That's just like him. Did he bother you?" "No," I said quickly. "We just talked." He smiled, satisfied, and the topic ended there. Just like that. Yet for me, it didn't end. That night, as he slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the hostel, the distant footsteps, the occasional laughter, the hum of a fan. I kept asking myself why that meeting had affected me so deeply. Days passed and life went on. Classes, meals, late-night conversations. I tried to bury my thoughts under routine. But then the messages started. At first, they were harmless. A short text asking how my friend was doing. A polite follow-up about college. I told myself it was normal, that parents worry. I replied briefly, carefully. Still, each notification made my pulse quicken in a way I didn't like. Over time, the messages became more personal. He asked how I was doing, whether I was eating properly, whether studies were stressing me out. No one else asked me those things so consistently. I should have set boundaries. I knew that, yet I didn't. I told myself I was just being polite. One evening, my friend was out with classmates, and I was alone again in the room. My phone buzzed. Another message. I stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. As I read, I felt that same unsettled feeling from before, the sense of being understood, of being noticed in a way that crossed an invisible line. I began to question myself. Why did these words matter so much to me? Why did I wait for them? The answers scared me, so I avoided them. I started noticing changes in my behavior. I became quieter around my friend, more careful with my words. Guilt followed me everywhere, even though nothing concrete had happened. It was an emotional weight, heavy and exhausting. I hated myself for it. He trusted me completely, and here I was, struggling with feelings I shouldn't have had. The conflict inside me grew stronger. Part of me wanted to cut all contact, to end whatever this was before it turned into something worse. Another part whispered excuses. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just conversation. That voice was convincing, and that made it dangerous. One afternoon, I skipped class and stayed in the hostel, telling myself I needed rest. The corridors were quiet again, just like that first day. I sat by the window, lost in thought, when I heard a knock. My stomach tightened even before I stood up. When I opened the door, he was there. "I was passing by," he said calmly. "I thought I'd check in." I should have said no. I should have told him my friend wasn't there and closed the door. Instead, I stepped aside. The conversation that followed felt heavier than before. Fewer words, longer silences. Everything that needed to be said seemed to exist between us without being spoken. I became acutely aware of how close this felt to something wrong. Not because of any action, but because of the emotion stirring inside me. I kept thinking of my friend, his laughter, his trust, the way it opened his life to me without hesitation. The contrast between that honesty and my hidden turmoil made my chest ache. At one point, he spoke quietly, almost thoughtfully. "Life puts us in difficult situations sometimes," he said. "Not everything is as simple as right or wrong." Those words stayed with me. They felt like justification, like permission, and that frightened me more than anything else. I realized then that this was no longer harmless. Even without touch, without confession, something precious was being compromised. When he finally left, I didn't feel relief. I felt worse. I sat alone in the room, hands shaking slightly, overwhelmed by guilt and confusion. I wasn't proud of myself. I didn't feel chosen or special. I felt weak. That night, when my friend returned, full of energy and stories, I couldn't meet his eyes. I answered him with short replies, pretending to be tired. He noticed, of course. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I lied. As he turned away, I understood something painful and clear. Infidelity doesn't always begin with physical acts. Sometimes it starts quietly, with attention, with words, with feelings you allow to grow in the dark. And once that line is crossed, even silently, you can never pretend it wasn't there. I didn't know how this would end. I only knew that whatever came next, there would be consequences. For my friendship, for my sense of self, and for the trust one was already betraying without meaning to. The next few days felt heavier than all the weeks before them combined. I moved through my routine like someone else was controlling my body, waking up, attending classes, eating meals I barely tasted. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. My friend noticed it more than I wanted him to. He always did. He started watching me closely, asking small questions, trying to pull me back into our usual rhythm. I answered him, but something between us had shifted. I was still there, yet somehow distant, like a shadow of myself. One evening, we sat in the room in silence. He was scrolling through his phone, and I was pretending to read. The fan hummed above us, filling the space between words. Suddenly he spoke. "You've been different lately," he said gently. Did I do something? The question hit me harder than any accusation could have. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a sharp pain in my chest. This was the person who trusted me without question, the person who shared his space, his life, his vulnerabilities with me. And I was the one who had changed. "No," I said quietly. "It's not you." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Still, he didn't push. That restraint made me feel worse. Some people demand explanations. Others trust you enough to wait. He was the second kind. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed everything. The conversations, the silences, the moments where I could have stepped back but didn't. I realized something uncomfortable. No one had forced me into the situation. I had participated by staying quiet, by responding, by allowing emotions to grow where they didn't belong. The next message came the following morning. I stared at my phone for a long time before opening it. This time, I didn't feel the same pull. Instead, I felt tired. The confusion, the guilt, the constant tension, it had all drained me. I typed a reply, erased it, then typed again. My hand shook slightly as I finally sent a message that was polite, but firm, distant but respectful. I created the boundary I should have set from the beginning. When the reply came, it was brief, understanding. That was all. I set my phone down and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not because I was losing something, but because I finally understood what it cost me to get here. I hadn't crossed a physical line, but I had crossed an emotional one, and that realization stayed with me. Later that day, My friend and I walked back to the hostel together. He talked about his plans, his dreams, the future he imagined. I listened, really listened this time. I saw how open he was, how honest, and I understood that trust isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It lives quietly in everyday moments, and it can be damaged just as quietly. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I spoke honestly, not about everything, but about myself. I've been struggling lately, I said, with my thoughts. He looked at me, concerned but calm. You could have told me. I know, I replied. I'm sorry. He didn't demand details. He didn't judge. He just nodded and said, "We'll figure out." Those words felt heavier than any punishment could have been. They reminded me of what I almost lost. Weeks passed. Slowly, the tension faded. Not completely, but enough for me to breathe again. Our friendship wasn't exactly the same, but it was real, and that mattered more. I learned to sit with my thoughts instead of running from them. I learned that attraction, confusion, and desire don't make you a bad person, but what you choose to do with them defines who you are. Looking back now, I understand that infidelity isn't always a dramatic moment or a single mistake. Sometimes it's a series of quiet choices made when no one is watching. Sometimes it's emotional, invisible to the world, but painfully clear to your conscience. That hostel room taught me more than any lecture ever could. It taught me about boundaries, about responsibility, and about the fragile nature of trust. Most of all, it taught me that growth often comes from discomfort, and that facing your own flaws is the first step toward becoming someone better. I still remember that day, that knock on the door, and how easily things could have gone further down the wrong path. And every time I think about it, I remind myself of one simple truth. Some lines exist not because crossing them is exciting, but because staying on the right side of them is what allows you to live with yourself afterward.